So take some yellow and white paint, draw a circle in the bottom third of your paper, put white paint in the centre of the circle and yellow along the outside. Use a paintbrush and swirl it around to make circular brushstrokes. Then you're going to take some yellow, orange, red and purple paint and start to create some horizontal bands of colour. Start with yellow, and I'm leaving a section at the bottom where I'll put the ground. Create a thin band of yellow paint. Make sure the paint's quite watery. Then start with a thicker band of orange. Now don't worry too much about blending the colours together at the moment. Just get the paint on, make sure it's nice and runny. I'm using acrylic paint. So I've added a little bit of water. I'm flicking the paint into the edges of my circle. That's my sun in the centre. And I'm using thick, heavy brushstrokes. Then I'm going to get a wider, flat brush. I've wet it with a little bit of water and I'm running it back and forwards to kind of get rid of any thick brushstroke lines and to melt the two colours together. I'm going to go back to my flat paintbrush. This is called a square or a flat brush, and I'm adding the red next. So a red thick band of paint goes on top of the orange. If you look at the colours as they merge together, you'll notice that yellow and orange merge together because orange contains yellow. Orange and this crimson red merge together because orange contains red. So again, take the flat brush, run it forwards and back so that you melt that line together so it's not very harsh, and you get rid of any brushstroke lines. So I'm making sure that this looks really watery and soft and dreamy. Then comes the best part. You're then going to add my favourite colour, purple. Now this is quite a deep purple, and you'll notice that as I wet it and water it down, it gets a little bit lighter in colour. And I paint pretty thickly here, my thick purple band of paint, right up to the edge of the red. Now unlike the other ones, because this purple colour is quite dark, I'm actually going to take a bit of red and run it along the line, just so that I create a little bit more of a smoother gradient into that purple. Take that thick wet brush and run it forwards and back again. Get rid of any harsh lines, and you notice I start to drift the colours down slightly so that I'm really creating a really soft gradient. Then I'm going to take a slightly damp kitchen sponge which I've ripped up, and I'm dabbing it into my yellow paint, and I am stamping on a very soft yellow tint, and this is to make the colours a little bit more softer, to make a gradient between them so that they do melt together. So I start at the bottom with the yellow. You can do this if you'd like. If you like the texture that you've already got with your paintbrush, that's good. But I like a softer texture, so I'm using this nice dabbing motion with my sponge. Once I've done the yellow, I move on to the orange, and I dabble the orange up through that line where it meets the red paint to soften everything. And I'm going to keep going all the way up those coloured bands until I've finished with my red in my purple. So this is quite fun, this bit. You want to just have a little bit of fun here. I never really plan any painting that I make. And so this is me just having a little bit of fun. And art should be fun, so you should be experimenting whenever you can. So there you go, there's me doing the red. And I take a little bit of purple. And I also kind of sponge a little bit of purple along the top line to make it deeper, and a little bit down into the red, just so that there is almost like an element of the night sky creeping in. So there you go, I'm deepening up that purple. Beautiful. The rougher your sponge, the better the texture is going to be, so you can experiment, rip or cut up holes into your sponge to make texture. From here, I'm taking a yellow paint which got a little bit of water in it, and a really small fine paintbrush, and I'm making little squiggly flat lines which run from the centre of my sun and out through the edges, almost to create clouds, and almost like the heat of the sun is disappearing out. So you don't have to do this bit, but I think it looks quite good once it's finished. And And like I said, I'm creating these squiggly lines and pulling them to the outside edges of my painting. I also use a little bit of white to go in there and give a little bit of detail. The white that I'm using is acrylic paint, so it stands out quite well. If you're using watercolor, what you can do is take some kitchen towel and just dab off some of the yellow, and that will give you a softer color. So there you go. There's my clouds. Now I wasn't really happy with how this looked. I thought it looked too heavy. So what I did next, and I think you should have a go at, is pulling the paint. So I'm taking the same brush that I used with my bands of colour, you'll see it in a minute, and I'm going to pull the paint from the centre of my sun outwards in the same direction as the land. So here I go with my brush again. I've taken some water off of it, and I'm now dragging those lines that I've created out to the edges. And there you go, it creates a nice soft sun. Now I'm taking a flat brush, this one's dry, and I'm taking a really thick black paint, and I'm starting to draw in the ground or the horizon line. Now this line has got to be pretty neat and sharp. So you'll see here that I don't really take the paintbrush off of the paper, and I use thick black paint to create this really sharp line. You want to do this here to create a really nice contrast between the texture in your sky and your sun and the flatness of the ground, and that's going to create some foreground, so it's going to give you some perspective. When we talk about perspective, we talk about things that are close and things that are far away. So I'm filling in a thick black band of paint, and I'm making sure I don't miss any lines, and I also want it to be pretty flat, so I am running back and forwards, making it as smooth as possible. Taking the same paint, but this time a smaller flat detail brush, I'm creating some squiggly lines. Now these squiggly lines eventually turn into a pretty important detail of a landscape. You can probably already tell what it is. I'm creating tree trunks, and I'm basically doing freehand here, and all trees are organic, so they have a very fluid line that they create. So you don't have to be very neat, and you don't have to follow mine. Mine are very, very simple, and I just look at how I want the tree to move. I think about where I want the most detail, and that's where I draw my trees. So I'm drawing little lines off of my main tree trunk to do branches, and then I go back and I thicken out the tree trunk, and I make sure that I connect the bottom of the tree into that thick black band so that it all runs smoothly together. Then taking the same brush, I am flicking, doing little brush strokes up into that yellow band, which is almost dry now, and I'm creating grass. This is quite cool to do, and it also gives you more foreground to work on, some nice perspective. You can do as much of this as you want. I just did little sections behind and in front of my trees. I didn't do it all along. You can also create rocks or mountains if you'd like to in the foreground. If you are doing, say, a desert theme, you could do cactuses. This really is a really easy trick to make your paintings look really, really good. So here I am painting out all my grass. I'm using really small flicks of my brush, and I'm working really small in little areas. I'm taking now a stamping brush, which is really rough and it's dry, and I'm stamping it into the black paint, and then I'm taking some paint off using some kitchen towel. Now I'm going to take a bobby pin from my hair and thread it through the paintbrush to create a fan brush. A fan brush is a flat shape. I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. And I'm stippling on the black paint to create my tree leaves, or my, my canopies of my trees. There I go. I put my bobby pin into that stamping brush or stencil brush, and it creates a flat shape. This is what a fan brush looks like. It does the same job, except I prefer the stencil brush in this one because it gives you slightly better texture. So there you go, there's me stamping all my leaves. Once I've done that, I'm then going to take a dry flat square brush, and I'm flicking white paint, which has a little bit of water in it to make it a little bit more fluid, off the end of the brush to create some stars in the sky. I made a little bit of a mess there, but I'll fix it up. I'm keeping these stars in my purple band. Now that little bit of a mistake that I made, I turned it into a moon. What I did was took a bit of my white paint, I swirled the brush around. You can see I'm flattening that round brush to create a circle. Then I took some kitchen towel and I stamped off some paint to give it a bit of texture and a ghostly appearance, and that creates a nice moon shape. Then to outline it, just to make it a little bit more clearer, I went around it with a little band of black paint and a tiny little brush. Then I decided I really liked the way that looked, and so I took the same flat brush, I just cleaned it, and did a white little detail around my sun, almost like a little halo. I kept it to the top section of my sun that was sitting in that red band, and just little bits on the bottom outside edge just to create a little bit more detail. I added a bit more white into the center because I thought that I lost it and I liked that white. And then I was pretty much done. So here is my finished African sunset silhouette painting. Pretty simple to make. You can make it along with me in the video. I'm going to add something special and then I'll come back and show you what I've done. As a little something extra that you might want to add. You might even add in some shadow puppets that I made in a tutorial a few weeks ago. And then you can change up your characters that are in your scene. So I've just created a little shadow puppet of a little giraffe here. You could do an elephant or a lion or any other animals that you think would live in this landscape, or you could create your own landscape. Maybe you want to do more of a cold sunset, and those colours could be blues and greens and really soft yellows. That would be really pretty. Whatever you make, I would love to see it, so make sure you send it to Lucy so I can have a look at what you're making, and I'll see you next week. Bye.